Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. And welcome back, everybody. Every time we get together with this gentleman, we learn so much. I take away certain things. Even before we got on here today, we talked a couple of minutes before the show, and I had no idea that he harnesses the power of energy healing. As a matter of fact, he gave an example of his maternal grandfather who has been doing this, or had been doing this for many, many years. Just a different aspect of Grant Venerable, who definitely rides on the side of science. Many eureka moments over decades. He's done lectures, published lots of articles, books. His memoir is fantastic. And we're going to look at wellness and healing today. It was kind of organically came up, I believe. He's our professional of the year. Grant, welcome. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Fine.
Just interesting. You wanted to talk about wellness and healing in some regards, and we kind of began there.
Yeah.
But this goes back many years, many different incidents in your life, right?
Many years. And I think one of the problems of the advancing intellectual age, I mean the intellectual era in which we live, is that we overthink. We tend to overthink things, and that crowds out the intuitive abilities of the human mind, of being able to be tuned in to what is, rather than trying to logically force things into place and just let them be. Back in, this is a long time ago, in 1954, my sister and brother and I were up on the Mojave Desert in a little community outside Victorville, California, which is really a very well-developed kind of a suburb of the desert. And we went to visit relatives who had a ranch, the Hudson Ranch, out in vicinity of Bell Mountain. It was a 100-acre ranch. And this family had they had hogs, 2 hogs, they had chicken, they had goats, a number of milk goats. And they had a well, and they had a 2-seat outhouse. And they had no electricity. Maybe they had a little, but they had a phone. But that was the way things were. And it was wonderful because at night there were no lights. So you could look up, and if on a clear night you could see the entire Milky Way, it seemed. It was like dropping down upon you all of these myriad of stars. That was my introduction to the universe by my dad, who had a good grasp of astronomy, which he had learned in school. But one of the problems he laid before our relatives was, they laid a problem before us. They said Ike, one of the hounds, was very ill, and he was malingering, and nothing seemed to work in getting him healed. So they were going to put him down. My dad said, well, just hold on. I've got to go into Los Angeles, 100 miles away, and on some business. But let me stop by Grandpa Scott, who was my mother's father, and get a consultation with him. That is exactly what he did. He described the dog's condition to Grandpa, and Grandpa gave him a little bottle of stuff, very dark stuff, which he called Pa's dope, Grandpa's dope. And he's told it, Dad, where to rub this around the dog's jaw, his teeth, the gums, and that was it. So that's what Dad did when he got back to the ranch, was to do that to Ike, who was really, he could hardly walk around. And but within a few days, Ike was running around. And after we left, he got well. And that's the kind of question that comes up. Well, how did that happen? We're so much looking at what science has taught us about microbial science and all of that contact this causes that. But there's bigger, higher causes in this universe, and that's what Grandpa was connected with. He didn't give a molecular chemical explanation of what was going on. He just said, do this and that, and the dog got well. And that story was passed down through generations in my family, of that there is a higher power available if you know how to access it. Well, now that's the question. And people need to meditate, to set their minds to be open to get answers like that. Well, it seems like our whole society is in a state like that, and that all of the people now are really being called, whether they know it or not, to meditate, to get answers, not to run off to experts and or listen to people on the TV and say, oh, this is the answer to this is the answer to that. All you have to do is X, Y, and Z, and it's solved, or elect this person over that person, and all of our problems are solved. Well, my whole life has been about not so much how, but being open to allowing those natural healings to take place. And so what I really wanted to start with was another story taking place in 1965, when, and it reads like this. It was around September 1st, and we had just had the Watts riots in Los Angeles. And I was packing up to go away to graduate school. For how long? I knew not how long. Nobody knew how long you'd take in graduate school. But there were two of us. That night, two very, I would say, all-American, fairly good-looking chemistry major, recent grads of UCLA, drove off in the night from Los Angeles, packed with a little food, going out U.S. Highway 66, which has been replaced by a few interstates now. But that's what we had, Highway 66, where you get your kicks on the Nat King Cole song. And we headed out to Chicago. And we reached the Colorado River by about maybe 2 o'clock in the morning. And I had foolishly, I was trying to, be real direct. I said, I'm going to have to stay awake. So I took some no-dose capsules somewhere around the Colorado River to stay awake. Well, those no-dose capsules made me so awake. My eyes were like just big as saucers. And I felt this urgency all over my body, not just to stay awake, but like I was hyper energized. And I said, oh no, this is not going to work. And I never took another one of those again.
I can't do them, by the way. It just makes me
found other ways.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the technology that was available if people wanted it. Well, we had planned to go straight through to Chicago. We only spent one night inside, and that was with cousins of my mother in Topeka, Kansas. But the big adventure for us was stopping in the morning in a little town called Liberal, Kansas. And Liberal, Kansas was out on the Kansas prairie, and we walked in, and I didn't realize until later that we had caused a sensation walking in. Now, it wasn't like we were looking like two guys from Mars or something. We were two fairly good-looking young guys, recent college graduates, walked in, and all of the cups, the coffee, the teacups, that stopped in midair, the forks stopped in midair, and people stopped eating to look at this sight walking into their midst. And I didn't realize until after we left, I think it had to do with our license plates, California license plates in the early days of hippies. We weren't dressed improperly, but, we were kind of laid back looking guys from California. And I think it caused such a stir that people didn't really know what to do about it. Anyway, we proceeded, and the we wound up in Chicago, and tried to figure out what I wanted to. What happened since then? We did get to Chicago, and I drove, my friend Mitch was his name, drove him to Madison, Wisconsin, so he could attend the University of Wisconsin graduate school in chemistry. I was to stay in Hyde Park, and where the University of Chicago was located, and that's where I went to graduate school in the University of Chicago. Well, what happened between that arrival time and today is that Mitch had become a psychotherapist in Hawaii. He had a fine family life, and he dropped out of chemistry, but then he discovered psychology and has had a very rich career in psychotherapy, family and marriage practice. I had a life as a chemistry professor and a Silicon Valley systems scientist, and then back to becoming a professor of many things, and it's all described in my memoir, Footprints in the Chaotic Unknown. It's available on Amazon by Grant D. Venerable. But I'm mentioning that because that's the backdrop to everything I talk about in doing podcasting. That's where I get my raw material. Well, neither of us, and I think not too many UCLA students or college students in that day, were that worried about getting a job afterwards, because it was something that happened normatively and practically automatically.
Can we talk about that? I'm curious.
Yes.
You know, back at that time, was there concern? You do school, you go, and I always look to the past, even way before I was born, what life was like, what the mindset was like back then. What was it like? You go to college. Are you worried about getting a job back then, or it's pretty much, yeah, I'll find one. I'm not even worried about that. Whereby nowadays you go to college, you know, it'll happen, but there is some concern what it's going to be, where it's going to be, culture, life, work balance, all of that.
It was more about where you would go to college. You would go somewhere where you would master the art of thinking. You would master the knowledge of the great thinkers over the ages. And at times you say, well, you knew what you wanted to major in, but you didn't do it. I didn't do it for a job. I wasn't thinking about a job because I knew in my heritage, my background, people didn't worry about jobs. Not in the class that I was raised in. By class, I mean socioeconomic heritage class. And
do you think?
Oh my goodness!
You think that's my
phone is ringing?
Is that the? I can't hear it. Hey, maybe somebody has a job offer. Do you think that's the way people who are going to college now, and if you're somebody who has a passion, knows that you want it bad, whatever it is, whatever field it is, you're getting, you're going to college, getting instruction, you just want it bad. This is whatever it is, you want to be a surgeon, you want to be, whatever it is, you want it so bad. Do you feel that universally, energetically, it's going to happen for you anyway because you're obsessed with it and you want it?
I think, yes, it was an assumption. It wasn't really an obsession. You just assumed you go to college, you're going to find something that you were interested in. I didn't know what kind of job I wanted. It wasn't until my second year of college that I realized, I think I want to be a professor in chemistry. I liked my fellow students in chemistry. I loved my professors in chemistry, what they were teaching us. And so I got into the flow of that day, which is looking at the kind of schools you wanted to go to next. And you had a pretty good idea, and you had good mentors as professors, and they would recommend schools. So I had a mentor from freshman, my freshman class in chemistry named Mustafa El Sayed. Well, that's obviously an Islamic name. Well, it turns out Mustafa was the first Egyptian, possibly Arab, to teach in the United States in chemistry. He was about 28 years old. Very dynamic, very energetic. The students adored El Sayed. He taught so beautifully, taught so imaginatively. Well, I began to get mentorship from Dr. El Sayed. And it was through El Sayed and working with him in his laboratory in maybe the third summer I was there, under a National Science Foundation grant. And that really got me stirred up. Oh, this is the direction I want to go. I want to study how molecules interact with light. There's light again. And use of light to do many things, from healing to curing food or whatever it is. So that's how I got into it. I also had another mentor who happened to be UCLA's first Nobel laureate in chemistry, named Willard F. Libby. And Libby mentored me to go to the University of Chicago. He says, that's where you should go. It's the best school of experimental chemistry in the United States. So that's where I was set to want to go. It so happened I was able to get into there. Nobody knew anything about affirmative action or DEI back in that day. There were networks that channeled bright youngsters into the places where they needed to be to fully develop. And it so happened that my cousins in Chicago were part of that network, on families who were connected to people inside where you could get grants to do things. But it was through a network. And then they formalized trying to do that, and that's sometimes a mistake to do, as it was in many cases. It was called affirmative action, and people were saying, well, you're a member of a minority group, and people are going to take care of you, they'll hire you. And I said, need that? I'm perfectly smart on my own, and I will get where I want to go. Thank you very much. That was the kind of attitude I had. So you can imagine, some thought I was a very arrogant minority person with some other minority names to go along with that. Well, everything worked out anyway. I got through. It was not easy. I worked my fingers to the bone, metaphorically speaking, but mainly I learned how to play the game of successful intellectuals in the science world. And it took a little bit of roughing up to smooth my rough edges of how I thought. It took me until the last year to realize I didn't go to the University of Chicago or UCLA for any other justification except to learn the Talmudic method, which was developed in Hebraic history of the rabbis, in working with the scriptures, in interpreting or reinterpreting scripture every 100 years or something like that to see if it was still valid. And if it wasn't valid, they had to modify the scripture. Well, don't we see? That's the whole basis of modern science. The natural sciences, physical, biological sciences, biochemistry, all of that, physics, astrophysics. How do you get truth out of something that cannot speak in your English or Spanish or what Chinese language that you speak? You develop how to apply the Talmudic approach, where you interrogate nature, you interrogate the galaxies, you interrogate the molecules, because they're not going to talk back to you and tell you what their structure is, or that they even have a structure. That's what I really went to graduate school, was to learn how to apply that. Now, we're probably getting here to the punchline. The punchline is the story of how a system works. all of the best systems in this universe were created by nature. What's the backside of that? If you want a system that works and you want to build one that works, you have to emulate nature. To do that, you have to understand all you can about natural processes, objects, things, whatever it is. That's what I did. Now, where we are at this point in time is we have to, we're looking at a more intuitive level. We're looking at the spirit of place, the spirit of time, the spirit of how time acts upon elementary particles, how time acts upon solar systems, how it acts upon galaxies, and then to be able to have a conversation with those galactic systems. Now, where we're coming to is we're doing an experiment with reality as it unfolds. The experiment that's happening now that nobody can understand comes out of the political regime, the social, political, economic regime of reality. And one learns, as Einstein did, to do thought experiments. You ask yourself, what if kinds of Talmudic method questions that you ask. I did that for every election for the last 10 years. I posited hypotheses because I've noticed patterns. And I said, well, maybe that's the right hypothesis. Well, if the results did not come out and validate that, I had to change my hypothesis. And I did that in the last election. So that's really as political as I ever get, is talking about something in general. But I also have taught myself that way. Don't get stuck in personalities. That's where people are. That's what they're upset about today. This personality thinks that. This personality advocates that. So what do? They draw boundaries between personalities or between themselves and personalities. They get stuck in personalities where there is no knowledge to be gained except that you might get aggravated or overstimulated or overjoyful very briefly, and then it goes back to not really knowing anything. Does that sound familiar?
It really does. We get caught up in those personalities and what somebody believes and thinks. I'm very much fixated on taking a cue from nature in terms of wanting to come up with a better plan for something. And it's interesting that we started talking about energy at the beginning of our conversation today. And when you look at nature, who better to harness the power of energy than nature, especially animals? They've got it. The lock on that in terms of energy. They realize it. They see it. They pick up on energy. That's why they've evolved as they have. They don't have to worry about mortgage payments and cars and all that other stuff.
That's right. So that's where we need to go. That's the answer to the questions I'm being asked by younger relatives and friends. Well, Grant, what do we do? This is a real quandary that we're living in. I said, no. Systems in general, whether they're alive, human, or inanimate, always right themselves. Now, where we get in trouble is when the ego gets involved and says, oh, I don't believe in that. I believe in this and that. Well, did you check your facts with the experiments and validate the truth of those facts? Or did you just have your own ego and your own opinion?
For sure. And we're just about out of time, but it's also when you go with your intuition and then your ego gets in the way and says, oh, that can't be the right answer. No, it's too easy. And then you overthink it. And then invariably you're usually wrong because it's my belief your intuition knows everything. Wonderful talking with you today, Grant. I know your memoir is available on Amazon, Footprints in the Chaotic Unknown. And thank you for interesting talk today. And every time we talk, I realize you run deeper. and about the energy thing, I had no idea that was on your radar as we started today. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Stephen.
All the best. We'll be right back. Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Adopt US Kids presents Multiple Choice Parenting.
Your daughter just had her first breakup. Do you A, put yourself in her shoes?
How could he do this to you? And for Sheila, she has split ends.
B, console her?
Oh, sweetie, this is going to happen a lot. 4, maybe 5 more times before you get married.
C, take charge?
Got to get this all straightened out. Give a little talking to, man to man, mano a mano. Hey, Steve! Is now a good time? No? Okay, no problem. Bye.
Or D, help her find a new boyfriend?
I know a great place to meet boys. The internet. Nice, single boys. Never mind. How about some ice cream?
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
For more information on how you can adopt, visit adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.